right. Well, I do see that we are at 3 o'clock Central, so that means it's 4 o'clock Eastern, and I did the math. It would be 1 o'clock Pacific.
There you got it.
I know, I'm not forgetting you guys out in California. So welcome. We are so glad you guys have joined us. I'm Heather Prenovo, and I'm joined by,
Megan Coons.
and we are going to take you on this journey through unraveling the mystery of AAC, and we're going to look at tools that can guide your exploration. So yesterday I was kind of talking about that communication, Bill of Rights, and those competencies. Are they, ready? Are they, ready? And we talked about those myths and who would benefit from AAC. So now we're going to look at tools that'll help still kind of guide you through that on what features maybe would meet those needs. So we're going to get started. We'll pop our cameras back off to save on the bandwidth. And here we go. Housekeeping, I just wanted to go in a little more detail. I know some people mentioned a little bit auto difficulties. Sometimes logging off and logging back in will help with that. If you're on the web version, where it just launched into your browser, sometimes clicking on, there's a little purple flower up in the corner, it'll download the free GoToTraining app onto your computer and load it that way. And sometimes that helps with the audio. And if you're still having difficulties, you can contact Log Me In. They're the ones who do the troubleshooting. We mentioned the training materials. Our handouts are in that dashboard or that toolbar under the materials tab. There are 4 different things in there. 2 of them are our notes handout and our tools handout, and then the other 2 have to do with the ASHA CEU registry. We'll talk about that in a second. At the end, there is a feedback survey. We really appreciate everyone who took the time to give us feedback. Megan and I do look those over. We do use it to help improve our trainings, think about other trainings. So we really appreciate that. So if you are able to take that at the end of the class, thank you. You get a follow-up email about 1 to 2 hours after class is over. That will have your certificate of attendance if you don't need the ASHA CEUs in the registry. And we would love for you to use the chat window to interact with us again and ask your questions. And just a little bit more about myself. My name is Heather Prenovo. I'm an ASHA certified speech language pathologist, and I am also an AAC consultant for PRC Saltillo in Minnesota and Wisconsin. I support our Saltillo products. We are going to be demonstrating and talking about our PRC and Saltillo products and applications during today's training, but we're also looking at those tools and strategies that can be utilized across AAC. Our disclosures, my financial disclosure, I'm an employee owner of PRC Saltillo, a non-financial ASHA member, SIG 12 member, MNSHA member, and a MNSHA AAC committee member.
And hi, welcome back if you were here yesterday, and welcome if you're new today. I'm Megan Coons, and I am the regional consultant here in Minnesota that covers the PRC brand of products, so the Accent devices, Lamp Words for Life software, Unity software, and Essence, if you are familiar with those. My financial disclosure is that I am an employee owner of PRC Saltillo, and at this time I don't have any non-financial disclosures.
Perfect. So we're going to start off with some interaction. We're going to launch a poll. If you could click and share with us, why are you here today? So we decided, yesterday as we talked through things, okay, is the child I'm thinking about a good candidate for AAC? Should I start considering it? Now it's kind of, where do I start? How do I know what devices or apps to trial? Does there need to be a specific assessment tool? Do I have to do, so many standardized things? So that was kind of where we came to designing this training, is looking at those next steps. What tools, what questions to be asking, and kind of bring that into focus as we look at an AAC evaluation and device trial. And so I was just kind of keeping that in the back of your mind as we keep going, that ultimately we want to be getting a system into the hands of these students or clients. And so everything we do has a purpose from the consideration process. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we'll give you another second to click on. Are you here because there are so many AAC devices and apps and boards and books? How do I know what will work best? Or is it my school, my clinic doesn't have any AAC assessment tools? How can I evaluate them? Or maybe it's, I don't know if my student or client can accurately pick buttons with so many on the screen. Do I need to limit the number of buttons? Do I need to really start slow? So, and if the other category seems to be more about why you're here, let us know. I do see Maureen work as an SLP with students with complex communication needs, many of whom are strong AAC candidates. The series of seminars looked interesting. I'm not new, but newer to AAC. Perfect. Thank you for your comments. Glad, and we're hoping that today's tools will help again. And we do know that for some, this isn't brand new, but kind of putting together some ideas to help guide you was our thought process. So thank you for everybody who clicked on our poll, and here's our results. So 62 to 64% are for the top two, 41% on kind of deciding where to start, and then 21% in the other. And Tracy wrote, helping teachers and parents who are brand new to AAC and getting them that valuable information to share. Awesome. And Jasmine, I'm very new to AAC and loving to learn more. Yay. That's why we love doing what we do, is we're all still learning, right? All right, so our agenda for today, we're going to look at a variety of tools that you can use to help look at your students' current strengths and needs. These will be possible avenues that you can pursue to get information that you need to help start choosing devices or apps to trial with your child or your student. But it's definitely not meant to be a battery of assessments to use. And so on the agenda you see, we're going to talk about the ELP for AAC, the SET framework, the Pragmatic Profile for AAC users, and the participation model for assessing AAC. And then we'll definitely have time for questions at the end. And throughout, we'll be watching the chat window for any questions during the session as well. Similar to yesterday, you're going to see the little icons throughout our presentation to help kind of flag you to what's on the slide and where it will be. There's the notes handout, the tools handout, and some website resources. And anything that we talk about, the links are either on the slides or in your notes handout under the references so that you have access to those later. Okay, so we're going to start out by talking about a case study kiddo. And so we'd like you to meet Max. We'll be referring to him and the tools that we're going to talk about throughout today and into tomorrow as well. So in your tools handout, there's a description of Max. And I'm going to just kind of review, oops, and I hit the wrong icon, 1 second. When all of your icons look the same. All right, so Max is a 10-year-old boy, and he has a diagnosis of autism, cognitive delay, mixed receptive and expressive language disorder. So we've got a lot going on. He is in 4th grade in a self-contained classroom. He has peers with autism in that classroom. He lives with his parents and an older sister outside of school. He's participating in adapted sports, groups, and attending church activities with his family. In the past, his team tried sign language using low-tech symbol books. Those had limited success for him as his communication partners did not always know sign language, or there was not enough vocabulary in the book that he was using. And if we keep looking through the case study handout from your tools handout, we talk about hopes and dreams. His parents will kind of just summarize, they're looking for that ability to be safe and to communicate in a way to reduce his behaviors. They really want to address those needs. Also knowing what he wants, how he's feeling, what his day was like, things he likes to do, things he doesn't like to do, all those kinds of things. His school team also wants him to be able to communicate with his peers and improve in social interactions, communicating what's on his mind, asking questions as it relates to learning. So, not just requesting things, but starting to participate in his learning. And then participating in different activities. And if you keep looking through, you'll see those current communication strengths. You're going to see more information about his skills and behaviors and levels of independence and barriers to participation. We also want to look at those strengths. He seeks out social interaction, especially from his peers, but they're not always appropriate. And so trying to increase that as he gets older and interacting so that they understand him and he can have that with them. We'll let you kind of glance through that, but what are some things that you've noticed as you looked at the case study about Max? Are there things that make you think, oh, I know exactly what I would want to do or try with him? Or are there still questions that you have about Max? So feel free to use the chat window and share your thoughts on Max and AAC.
Exactly. So how big should those icons be if he has delayed fine motor skills? Is he able to combine icons from sentences for a variety of purposes and across different contexts? Great. Did he use PEC specifically? That would be one of our questions. And this child sounds very familiar to kids that you're working with and already trying to figure out next steps for. Good. And I think, Heather, if you are still with us, we are not hearing you. You guys can certainly feel free to keep putting some of those comments in here. And let's see where Heather has gone here. So how will his emerging literacy relate to that device selection? Exactly. Heather's coming back in here in just a minute. It looks like she was having an issue with her microphone, so we're working through that. Does he have any behavioral difficulties with a very short attention span? These are all great things to kind of consider as we keep moving forward. So the tools that we're going to look at today, Heather, are you back?
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Oh,
Yay!
yay!
Going over
So
some
sorry,
of
guys.
the comments that people were sharing, questions that they had about the case study.
Perfect. Yes. And I was trying to read along with you guys when my mic went out, so my apologies.
All right.
What's technology difficulties?
Right.
Perfect. You guys had great questions and great thoughts on what else would we want to know about Max. So let's kind of dive in then to a possible tool that you can start looking at.
All right. So as we're going through today, the tools that we're really going to be looking at are going to help you gather information that you can use for writing your eval reports to really justify that need for AAC. So these tools that we'll be looking at will provide that opportunity for a dynamic assessment, really through the years for your child or student that you're working with. So it's going to help you gather that baseline information, know what their current skills, needs, and abilities are, and help you to be able to measure that future progress. So Heather and I kind of give you this fair warning that we have 4 big tools that we're going to be looking at that can be considered really tools for your toolkit. I'll cover the first 2 and Heather will cover the last 2, and kind of encourage you to hunker in and buckle up for this this wild ride through your assessment tools here. So
Right?
the first one, yeah, that we're gonna take a look at is called the ELP. If you haven't heard of this before, it stands for the Assessment of Learning Process for AAC. And it's really just another tool that's out there that can help you gather information as you go through this AAC consideration process. Think of this as a framework. So it's a framework that can be used to gather that baseline information. And for this one, we're really looking at gathering baseline information as it relates to physical access related needs. So this framework, we're looking at one's ability to physically access the device, and we're putting access to the device before we're really kind of looking through that communication lens. So exploring the access related needs for communication is definitely kind of step 1 of that consideration process, right? Somebody needs to physically be able to access the device before we can teach them how to communicate on it. So we start with the ELP. I think it's a great tool that really helps us separate language abilities from those access abilities. And important for you to know that the original ELP was called the ELP for Powered Mobility. And it was created by an occupational therapist. Her name is Lisbeth Nelson. And that work came out of Sweden, actually. And they were really looking at kids that use power chairs at very young ages and really through observation could identify the stages of learning that were going on and what skills led up to mastery of a particular level. So that original ELP for Powered Mobility has been adapted for AAC, and that was done in partnership with Lisbeth, as well as 2 SLPs, Sarah Wilds and Chip Clark. So we're going to take a closer look here and really break down this assessment of learning process for AAC a little bit further. So it's really just another tool to use in your toolbox for the consideration process. And it's going to provide us with that framework to help us better gauge where a learner's current skills are with their access method. So just to kind of give you a definition here, when I say access method, I'm really talking about how is the individual interfacing with the device. Are they using their hands to directly touch the screen, or as we might say, direct select? They might be a direct selector. Do they have maybe more limited fine motor skills and we need to really explore an alternative access method so that we're not limiting what they can say because of how they're accessing the device? If we need to look at alternative access and we're doing so in the consideration process, we might look at switch scanning. It works a little bit like a button, and every time you push the button, it advances the cursor on the screen through the vocabulary program. Other access methods might be a head mouse. So it just works off of your head movement that's controlling the cursor on the screen, or even eye tracking that really kind of more reads your eyes and follows where your gaze goes on the screen. So in addition to gauging kind of those current skill levels, the ELP also helps us understand that there is a true progression to learning your access method as you go through the longer you use your communication device or the access method, that there truly is a progression that learners go through before they have mastery of that access method. So it's really important for us to note that. It's kind of like, you know, we don't have that expectation that the first time a child gets on the bike without training wheels that they can just ride it, right? There's lots of things that kind of lead up to that happening. So it helps us create that baseline, but it also can be used really to help us monitor that progress over time so that we can provide that just right support to help the learner get to the next level in using their access method. I think it's important to note that sometimes the stages of learning an access method are very hard to see and definitely probably more abstract to gauge where they are. So that's why we're talking about the ELP. It can really help you do this as it helps you plot supports to support your learner get to that next stage. It's broken down into 3 broad stages of learning, and then there's 8 specific phases that we're going to take a closer look at as we look at the 5 different levels of assessment. That sounds like a mouthful, so let's take a peek here closer at the ELP. Just as a reminder, if you weren't with us yesterday, you'll see a little toolbox icon in the bottom of your screen here on this slide. That's just your reminder that this is a handout that you have access to through that materials tab so that you can more easily follow along here. So again, the ELP lets us separate those language skills from the access skills as we work towards mastery of that access method. So first, we're going to take a look at those different stages here. So in stage 1, it's really focused on exploring functions. So we're really focused in this stage on what is the body doing and what is the body doing to make something happen with this access method. During this stage, the learner is really moving through exploration and development of using that access method. So if it's a switch, we're working on intentionally maybe hitting that switch in the early stages. So we're targeting a range of activities that's really going to address attention and increasing attention over time and early targeting of specific targets on the screen. So there's 3 different phases in stage 1. So you'll see those there: novice, curious novice, and beginner. And on the form here, you can see listed on the left-hand side of the table here. The goal of stage 1 is really kind of moving from that place of not having interest maybe in the access method or not having intention to really starting to show that you have intention to using this. So stage 1, it's like everything is totally new to them and they're working on the pieces of cause and the pieces of effect here. So maybe we placed a switch on somebody's wheelchair tray. They don't really even know what that button is. They don't know what it does. They don't know how to use it. Everything is totally new. In this stage, we might also see them start to push that switch, and they might note that it caused something to happen, but they might not yet know that they are the agent that caused the something to happen through their movements in their interactions with that switch. So in this stage, they really grow to not knowing anything, it's all new, to knowing that their movements made something happen. So we're gaining that intentionality here. So notice that in this stage, we're focused on the body and the access method. So really looking at this access here before we even start to measure communication or before communication even comes into play. In stage 2, it's really about sequencing an activity. So we're still focused on what is my body doing? What is my body doing in connection with this access method? And here we start to see that some communication might be introduced. The learner really is starting to sequence their motor movements and their cognitive acts to actually access communication and language in their environment. And this wouldn't always have to be on a high-tech device either, I should say. So the task really builds in complexity here in this stage as we progress into phase 2. As it progresses where we have 2 different phases, the advanced beginner and the sophisticated beginner there. So oftentimes when we're in this stage 2, we see learners make gains and then they regress back to stage 1, and then they pull back up ahead, and then they regress a little, and then they pull back ahead maybe a little bit further. So it becomes really important to continue to assess their skills really on an ongoing basis so that you can really truly stay on top of their progress here as their skills grow and they work more towards that mastery. If you're looking upward on your diagram here, we bump into stage 3, and this is really all about understanding performance, kind of perfecting your performance. So certainly our focus is still on the body, And we are probably learning that we have more control of this access method depending how we're moving our body to engage with that access method, and we're using it for communication. We might also have expanded our performance into connecting with the world around us, the environment more, as well as everyday activities. So in this stage, we really have a good understanding of the access method. We know that it can be used for communication and that it might have different functions beyond communication as well. So in this stage, the access method becomes automatic, right? We're perfecting those motor movements to control something, and we're working towards mastery here. So, so how can we do this most efficiently? Are we fine-tuning our movements? So I guess that's probably the question, right, that our users are asking themselves is like, how can I do this task on my device most efficiently? And they're really working on kind of fine-tuning what their movements look like. Maybe where a cursor was really jittery before, it's more smooth. So we have better control, better access, maybe better control of those kind of smaller movements. So putting your gaze up to the top of the screen here, across the top of the table there, you're going to see the different 5 areas of the assessment that we're going to be looking at here. The first one is we're looking at activity and movement with AAC. So when we're gauging this from phase 1 to phase 8, we're really going from having really random movements, maybe unintentional movements, to developing very clear and precise control over the access method. And in the second column there, you're going to see understanding of the AAC device use. In this one, we're really going from having no understanding of the device, or the access method, I should say, sort of that stage of, I don't know what this is and I don't know how to use it, to really gaining complete understanding. The next column moves over to attention to the device and their surroundings. So from here, we're kind of gauging in the beginning that they might be more distractible to then having longer periods of that sustained attention. The next one we're looking at is your social interaction and communication with your communication partners. So this might be in the very beginning that there might be little social interaction because so much time is focused on making this access method work, right? And the ability to kind of go between communication partner and back to the device more fluidly. So we're fine-tuning skills there. And lastly, in that final column, you'll see expressions and emotions that they can use. So from maybe making really short glances to their communication partner to be, or on the device with the access method, to be fully engaged with that device and the communication partner as well. All right, so the second page here that we've pulled up is also one that is going to be in your materials tab. And this one is just really a nice overview that gives you some real great sample examples of what we're looking at in every stage and every phase. So we're not going to dive any deeper here because we did that big picture view, but wanted to point out that you have this in your handouts as well. So the next one here is, for sake of time today, we're really just referring back to Max's case study. And Heather and I took time to kind of go a little bit deeper through that case study and pull out some specific information that really helped us plot where we think his skills and abilities with the ELT might be. So for Max, you can kind of see here that, sorry, I'm just pulling out my copy because got my bad eyesight here. He understands what an iPad does and has interacted with an AAC app on the iPad, right? So we know we're kind of looking at this from the fine motor perspective here. We also know he can push a button to make something happen. He can find targets on this, and he can also make selections. He still is seeking out assistance from a knowledgeable other or a staff in order to use a device, so he's not totally independent here yet, but growing in those skills. And he also does seek the support of an adult, so he might grab an adult's hand to support him in touching the device. So he's kind of lacking that confidence to make the touch on the screen himself, but again, growing in those skills. He's definitely showing awareness that this device will help him, but we do see some frustration still when communication breaks down, certainly. We know he can follow a visual schedule with very few reminders, so that's kind of that strength. And he's also shown that he benefits from a model on the AAC device. And when a model is provided, he really can follow it and visually attend to it. So he right now is really expressing those emotions with a variety of facial expressions, gestures, body language, and actions. So just to kind of point out kind of where we ranked him based on this information from the case study, under that first column where we're kind of gauging the assessment for activity and movement with the device, we ranked him as a 3. So he's really in that beginner area. He's gaining the ability to control his access method. He has that intention. He can find a target on specific parts of the screen. And maybe he's even started to try to target a couple of words on the device. He has understanding of the device. So we rated him as a 4 here because he's definitely consciously aware that the tool can be used for interaction. He knows that this gets him things and that this gets him interaction and those rich experiences with people. For attention, we ranked him as a 4. He's really starting to shift his attention from the device to the task to a communication partner, and he's really moved past that highly distractible stage. So he's having longer periods of that focused attention. So some great skills are developing here for him. When we're looking at his social interaction, we've rated him at a 3. He's responding to eye contact and social signals and is starting to initiate 2, but requesting a prompt or that hand support from his communication partner in order to be successful with the last part of actually touching the screen. And for his expressions and emotions, he's a 5 here. He's mostly super eager and smiling, excitable to use the device. He definitely is showing us signs of hyper focus where we see that super serious, like I'm working face. And sometimes he expresses frustration when that task gets more challenging. So that frustration here is actually something that you do note when we're in phase number 5 there. We see eager, smiling, serious, or frustration. That's actually kind of a good sign to see here because it means that we're challenging him. And with that challenge, we're hoping it's going to grow those skills and bump him up into kind of more that expert working towards mastery level. So as long as he's not living in that stage of I'm completely frustrated the entire time that we're working on these types of tasks, we know that this is a healthy challenge for him that can help him kind of level up, if you will. Okay, so when we're looking at his current levels here, I see that he has 2 3s, right? We've ranked him as beginner for 2 areas. And I might be asking myself when I'm kind of looking at this overall breakdown of where he falls, what can I really do to support him now to help him grow his skills so that he becomes a 4? So we're looking at this for activity and movement with AAC as well as his social interaction skills. So I'm kind of asking myself, like, if those are 3s, how do they become 4s? So what tasks and activities are we going to do, right? We can kind of brainstorm this. This would be something that we would brainstorm collectively with his team, but what are we really going to do to bring him up to that next level? And when I'm thinking about this, I actually get the image of a physical ladder, and I'm on step 4 of that ladder, or rung number 4, and he's on the 3rd one. And I am trying to do everything I can to kind of pull him up to where I am to help him kind of level up. So for the sections that are 4, I'm asking myself, what can I do? Or what traits might we be able to identify that tell us he would be working towards a 5? What are those interactions that we might be providing? So this information can be super helpful to have when you're going through the AAC trial process as well, because it gives you very specific areas that you can really work on targeting during your device trials and also monitoring to really have that justification to say, like, this tool has helped us grow in our ability to use the device and reach mastery of those specific access related skills. Okay, so here on this slide, you will see at the bottom that we do have that little notes icon. This is just your reminder if you're a note taker that you certainly can use the notes handout in the materials tab. And we'll take just a brief pause here for you to kind of jot down the key takeaways for this section. But as a reminder, the ALP for AAC can be used to gather that baseline information when we're really talking about access and the use of an AAC system. So access we talked about could be switch scanning, could be direct select, could be head pointing, eye gaze. And the ALP can also be used to measure progress during your trial, but also beyond, right?
And there was a question in the chat window, and I tried to answer it in the chat window, but Jasmine was wondering, do clients typically go through those phases 1 through 3 quickly? And I said it really does vary. You know, some may hover in that for a while, and I've seen a couple of years of hovering back and forth, like you said. Well, maybe make some gains, then we come back. So it really is variable by client.
Exactly, I totally agree. Yep. All right. So like I said, buckle up and hang on, right? So as we go, yay! Yep. So here we are, taking a deeper dive here with other tools that could be used in your toolkit when you're going through this assessment process. So, you know, really part of why this series was created too was that because so many times when Heather and I are out in the field supporting AAC, we hear people ask us, what in the heck is an AAC assessment? Is that like a specific document that I can find on the website somewhere? Is that under ASHA? Like, where am I going for this document? Or what is this? Is this a standardized test? What am I supposed to be doing or administrating? So people are kind of telling us like, we're on board to do it, but we don't exactly know what those tools are that we're supposed to be using, or is it a document or whatever? So, you know, part of why this series was created is really to support you in understanding kind of what tools could be used to gather this information that we call an AAC assessment. So as we mentioned in the beginning, the goal of, you know, for today is not really to give you a standardized test or battery of different things that should be completed from front to back for every single kid that you're considering AAC for. You know, that type of document just as a whole or a standardized test doesn't really exist. So this is really, think of it as your go-to tools, your toolbox that you can use when you're considering AAC for an individual, that really provides you with different frameworks that you can use, different checklists that you can use, different comparison charts that's going to help guide you through the consideration process, guiding you towards what actual devices or vocabulary files, what features are you looking for. So you can think of these documents really as your toolkit to use when you're evaluating individuals that you're serving and considering AAC. You're really, you know, taking all of the information and all of these resources and summarizing them into one document that really reports your findings that can be used to support the acquisition of an AAC device, right? So that part is needed for many different funding sources. So each section is really going to start to layer on the other section in hopes that it gives you a clearer picture of where your individual's needs really are. Where are their skills? Where are their needs? And where would we like to see them go in the future? So what rung of the ladder are they currently on? And our goal is probably pretty high, right? That we want them to keep climbing that ladder. So another framework that we're going to explore here is the SET framework. And this was a tool that was created by Joy Zabala. And the framework was really developed to promote a more collaborative type approach when considering assistive technology in general. So looking at tons of different areas, including mobility, reading and writing, daily living tasks. Today, we're going to kind of look through the framework, this SET framework as it relates to communication. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But SET really stands for the student, the environments, the tasks, and the tools. So many times I really think that the part of the process that we get like the most jazzed, most excited about is picking the tool. We might go to a convention. I say go, you might go to a virtual meeting, right? But back in the day when we went in person to things, I feel like that's where I always came back so hyped up about like the latest thing I saw and how cool it was and how much potential there could be for it. And sometimes I think that excitement leads us to pick a particular system first, right? We see something new that looks interesting, it appears to have the features we need, and we pick it because we know the benefits that it could have for a student. But I think that this framework really encourages us to still get excited, but to take a little bit of a pause and really dive deeper into looking at that communicator. What are the different environments that they are communicating in? What are the different tasks that they need to complete to get through their day? And in what environments are they in before we really jump to kind of picking the tool? So a lot of kind of this homework comes into it that guides us to the tool. So, also most importantly, and we see this out in the field too, that this consideration process really does work best when we have the perspective of the entire team. So each member of that team brings you a totally different perspective that you might not have otherwise, based on your interactions with the individual that's being evaluated or based on your experiences with them. Sometimes it's even just based on like what the task you're doing might be so different from the task somebody else is doing that there isn't the opportunity for them to show you certain things. So when we come together more collaboratively, it really sheds light on these different areas. So, as an example, a private therapist at an outside clinic that might be guiding an AAC assessment might not be aware of all the different tasks that we're doing at school. Or a parent that's also part of that consideration process might not know all of the specifics of the classroom, or the different environments that that child's in during the day, different seating that might be used, different positioning that might be used. They might not have full awareness. So a collaborative approach here for this framework really is going to help paint the clearest picture of this information. A school therapist might not have all the insight to all of the environments that the child's in outside of the house, or outside of school as well. So really coming together to collaborate is the key. So certainly not limited to, but people that would bring really important perspective would be parents, family members, teachers, certainly your specialists like your SLPs, your OTs, your PTs, your paras. Oftentimes the paras are really the ones that are implementing the AAC in the classrooms. They bring tons of insight, group home staff, what have you, other healthcare providers. So really important to get that perspective here. If you haven't heard of this resource before, we're linking to it here at the bottom. You can kind of see the website there, but if you haven't checked it out before, Practical AAC is just a great resource. It's an AAC related blog that's online. And I know for Heather and I, it really helps keep us kind of a buzz on what's new with AAC. They have different guest writers, links to tons of different resources, and we really kind of think of it as like a treasure trove for all information
Oh, yes.
AAC. So if you haven't checked it out, I would definitely bookmark that one. I think you can almost use it as its own like search engine related
Right.
to AAC specific stuff.
Uh-huh.
But Vicki Clark wrote a blog post for Practical AAC, and it was all focused on AAC assessment and the SET framework. So it seemed perfect to kind of pull in here. And in her post, she was really spending some time discussing the student section of the SET process. So she really highlighted that we really need to be more conscious in honing in on what are the students or the individual's current abilities. What are their strengths? What's their learning style? What really motivates them? I think that this is so important to reflect on, because sometimes just in the roles that we're in, there are so many different assessments that need to be completed. And it's easy to kind of enter into this testing model where it can become easy to be more focused on the deficit areas because we're constantly working to set goals to support those deficit areas.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think if you guys were part of the conversation yesterday, so kind of reflecting back to that, we were talking about presuming potential. So sometimes I think because we're so into this testing model, it lets us slip back to creating prerequisites that maybe aren't really there. So when we bring the focus back, we flip that switch and we first focus on those abilities and the strengths that this individual has in place of the deficit areas. It can really help guide us towards the tool that's going to help them achieve those goals. So one question we could be asking ourselves here is, what is the individual, the student, the client, what are their current AAC tools that are going to help them achieve their communication goals now, but also in the future? And what motivates them? What are those strengths? So as I mentioned earlier, that Joy Zabala created this framework really to be considered when looking at assistive technology in general. So we just need to remember when we're looking at the set framework and we're going through each of those 4 areas that we're really considering communication at the forefront here as we go through. So the first area that we're going to talk about is the student. So we've talked about documenting one's current abilities and strengths. In this area, we're now diving deeper to really look at areas of growth for the student. So what does the student need to be able to communicate that they're not currently independent in communicating at this time? Essentially, I'm kind of asking myself, like, what even led me to thinking that they needed an AAC system? What was that question that came to my mind? So if an individual is not able to communicate their emotions or their comfort levels with nonverbal gestures or facial expressions some of the time, but maybe if there's a new communication partner, they're not successful in this area at all, then that might be an area that we want to address, right? Or as they grow and transition to a new school or a new program, and they need to communicate things with more unfamiliar communication partners, this might also point to another area of concern that we want to be able to focus on. So what are they not able to do at this time that we could focus on as a goal here? So how are we gathering this information about the student? Certainly not an exhaustive list here for you, but a few suggestions that came from Vicki Clark's blog post I had mentioned earlier, is that we really need to listen, watch, and assess. Simple as that, right? So, right. So we're really going to interview and listen to the team. Again, those perspectives are critical. So take all of the information, all of the different perspectives from those team members from within different environments through the individual's day, and we kind of start to piece more information together here. We want the picture of this individual to be really painted nicely so that that we have the answers to these questions. And we can openly ask questions to individuals that maybe don't work in your setting. So if you're a school therapist, you're maybe contacting a private therapist they might be working with and reaching out to family to really do this listening part of the interview. We watch, right? We're looking for times where we can see that communication is breaking down and that we can document that as an area of need that we need to focus on. And we do that purely through observation. Sometimes, like I said, we show different things based on what task we're doing, where we might have more frustration with a particular task or with a particular communication partner or a particular environment. So it's really important, again, that perspective to piece together all of this information. And lastly, we assess. We can absolutely use information that we have previously gathered here. There's no need to totally recreate the wheel. So you use what you have in addition to some of these frameworks that we're going through to really collect this type of information. And you can and you should use previous assessments and documentation to pull into this set framework as well. All right, so for the environments, we're really thinking about what environments does the individual need to communicate in? What supports do they need to help them communicate, whether these are physical supports, equipment supports, instructional supports, and what are the expectations from the family and the people around them or for others in their community? So for the environment, we really need to be thinking about two main things. I think about the places that they currently go outside of their home and school. So maybe this is a pretty broad list. What activities are they in? What organizations or clubs are they part of? When they go out in the community, where are they going? Are we at restaurant, shopping at the mall, or are we not doing those types of things? Which might be the answer. Are they going to frequent doctor's appointments? We're kind of piecing together, like, where are we communicating to help us determine some of the features that might be needed on a device. So these are really going to be the different environments that they communicate in throughout their day. Within these environments of home, school, community, work, what are the specific places within those environments that they will be using their device? For example, at home, are they just using the device while in the kitchen or the living room, or they also have a need to use it in their bedroom? Now, that might sound silly if you're working with somebody who is ambulatory and carrying their device around, but if you're working with somebody that might use a wheelchair, let's say, and their device is mounted on the wheelchair, it's a really important consideration. They need to have that device in different areas of their house. There's more that we might need to consider there. So in thinking about school, some of our environments might be the gym, the playground, the lunchroom, the classroom. And what supports do they need to help them communicate? Sometimes these supports really can change based on the environment and become a very critical piece that we see in the field. I think the biggest thing for me that I have noted is when I'm working with kids who have more complex motor-based needs, maybe kids that are that use a wheelchair, that are using AAC and we have it mounted to their device. What does their positioning look like, and what does their mobility really look like in these different environments? Let's say that at school, I might have a table that I just set the device on and I can be super successful with it because my wheelchair gets right up to that table, my legs go under, everything's nice and comfortable and perfectly positioned. But maybe at home, I don't have a table like that I can really pull up to be in a comfortable position to be able to use my device. So really diving deeper into these environments can help. And I think it's a really important piece. If we don't consider these pieces, you might end up with a device that can only be used in the garage of somebody's house because it was attached to a wheelchair and the wheelchair is not accessible in the family's split level home and there's no other mounting equipment. That's a true story. Worked with a family that had a split level house, got a wheelchair mount, got the device, to later find out that the wheelchair does not come in the home because their house is not accessible. It's too heavy of a chair. So for this particular individual who was using eye gaze, they had no other mounting solutions that were considered during the AAC assessment process. So that was kind of a miss there. So I think that really considering these perspectives of the team help make sure that we're moving forward with the best equipment based on the environment here. All right. Heather, thank you. So to simplify the environments part of the SET framework, we really need to consider who are our communication partners. What is the communication partner's hopes, dreams, desire? And what are the communication partner's hopes, dreams, and desire for the AAC user? Right? What are the physical environments? We dive deeper into that will be using the device. Some other things to consider might be like, how loud is the environment? How wet is the environment? Are we in a snowy place like where Heather and I live, where it's raining or snowing? Kind of, we'll say a large majority of the time. Yeah. Is it a really bright environment? Is it a small space that we're in? Those might be some additional questions that we're asking. And then we're talking about daily activities. What are those daily activities that we participate in that impact the AAC choice? So all of these are important pieces to know the answer to kind of piece it all together. So what are the specific things? So here we're moving on to tasks. What are the specific tasks or things that the student needs to be able to communicate to reach the expectation? So in the area of tasks, we're really thinking about communication here as it relates to a specific task. We want to look at specific things that the individual wants to be able to communicate throughout their day, and we consider those things to be the tasks. So if we want a student to initiate greetings to family members, that could be considered a task. Or if we want them to state their things that they like and things they don't like related to activities or foods or movies, that would also be a task. If we want them to direct personal cares, or if we want them to share news between home and school, those would also be considered tasks. So following along with Vicky's blog post suggestions here, we've outlined really the tasks portion of the SET framework into 3 different sections for you. So functional messaging needs, language development needs, and then the social relationship needs. So when we're thinking about those functional messaging needs, what words or messages do they need to be successful in these different environments? And what language skills do they have? What structures do they need to have in place for those language skills on their device to be able to develop at an age appropriate, in an age appropriate way? And also, how do they need to communicate in order to develop and maintain personal relationships when they're using their vocabulary system?
I think that one's huge. If it's too formal, are they interacting with their peers? And if it's not formal enough when we go out into the community, we have to have both.
Absolutely. And now we're on to the tools section. I say like the long-awaited tools section, the stuff that we like see and we get, it's what it lights the fire, right? It gets us so excited because you see the potential it could have for somebody. So when we're thinking about tools, what is needed by the student and others for the student to communicate in the given environments in order to meet expectations? So what tools are really going to help them meet those goals? So here we're really considering all options. So from picture symbols to a switch, like we talked about earlier, hitting a switch and maybe programming a button to get somebody's attention. We're talking about facial expressions and gestures. Maybe we're talking about a low-tech communication book. We're talking about all the things on that continuum of technology from low-tech up to high-tech devices. So oftentimes, in fact, the best solution is really a toolkit of different options. It's not always going to be one thing that's like the be all end all, because that might not be flexible enough to meet the needs in these different environments to complete different tasks. So it might not be that one particular tool is going to meet just all of these needs. Rather, it's going to be a combination of tools. Maybe some of you have heard or supported kids before that are swimmers, and you've maybe seen how like a low-tech communication paperboard could be laminated and then taped onto the top of a kickboard as kind of that low-tech solution when we might not think it's the smartest to bring a high-tech device into the pool, let's say. Or I've heard of families that do the same kind of thing. They make like a low-tech board, they laminate it, and they hang it in the shower or the bathroom to support the personal cares, right? Directing personal cares. Or maybe there's some type of communication, low tech, that has maybe more noun-based choices for mealtime, right? If we're making choices. So it really could be a toolkit here. We don't, you and I, we don't rely on just one form of communication. I don't have my camera on now, partly because bandwidth, that's huge. But the other part is everyone always tells me I talk with my eyes. So I make really big eyes and really big gestures and things are always moving. Right? Like we use our full body for communication. We don't just rely on one form either. And the same is true for people who use AAC. It's a combination of these different tools that's really important to help them meet those needs. So as we mentioned earlier, we get really excited about the tools part here. And sometimes we start with the tool and hey, let's give it a try before we really consider this framework in looking at the student, the environment, the tasks, the tools, their abilities. We get so excited about that tech that we do a happy dance, but just kind of reminding you to pause and really kind of go through those different steps to help guide different options considering the student environment task and the tool. Okay, so here again, you see that little toolbox. So this is a handout that you do have accessible to you that is in your packet. And it was modified from the SET framework to really just remind us about those different aspects of communication and AAC that we want to consider here. So here you can see that it breaks down and provides kind of just that space for you um, to jot down information about the individual that you're supporting as it relates to kind of the SET process. So when we start at the top and we put in that student information or the information about the individual, we're jotting down their strengths, their current abilities. We're then going to dive down into the environments that we've talked about, as well as the functional and social communication tasks that we are looking to support. The tools section here is really something to highlight, as it provides a very nice checklist for you of some of the features that you're going to find on communication devices. Things like what type of symbol, what type of linguistic feature, maybe things like you want the device to have recorded and synthesized speech as an example. This allows you space to document down what access method you might be considering and what features of that access method are needed. On the back side here, we dive deeper into the integration features. So if we're using the device for communication, maybe we also want the device to be able to control a computer or use it as an environmental control that could also maybe turn on lights or connect with smart home devices, those types of things. So there's room here to document those needs and goals as well. What do we know about their positioning or their need for mounting solutions? There's space for you to document that or consider those options, guide that consideration. And lastly, we have the other section here. And this is, other is not to be thought of as not important, because you have some really amazing important things that need to be considered, such as like what is tech support for the device, warranty, what kind of training needs have we identified. And then there's a nice big space there for you to just document down other notes as you're working through the process and thinking about these needs. Okay, so next for you, what we have here, just for sake of time today, is we've kind of filled in the SET framework here with Max in mind. So we're going to kind of quickly go through this together, but under that student and client information, under current abilities, you can see in the skills and behavior section here that Max is a fast learner. He showed us that. Under the background information, you can get more information here about his language skills as well. When we're looking at areas of need, you'll see in the current communication section that he's highly unintelligible to unfamiliar listeners. And under skills and abilities, going off of your case study here, he gets frustrated when communication breaks down and he doesn't know how to repair it yet. So we also see that he has low muscle tone, which is impacting his fine motor skills. And we might need to consider that when we're thinking about him carrying a device. So how portable is that device going to be for him? In looking at that background information, we can see that he has a diagnosis of cognitive delay and autism. So certainly some factors to factor in when we're thinking about features. When we're thinking about his environments, we can see from the background section of the case study that Max is in a variety of settings that include home, school, after school activities, and church. So we're definitely thinking more about those activities and as that relates to portability of the device as well. Some functional messages that were listed in the hopes and dreams would be to have his emergency information easy to get to, gaining more information, asking questions, and participating in those classroom activities. And also under hopes and dreams, it lists some social messages that might be more helpful for him to communicate in those social scenarios. When we're diving down into the tools and we're looking at the current communication section here, we see a list of ways that Max has really tried communicating and some reasons why those methods maybe weren't working for him in the past. And in the features section here, we're really looking at, you'll really be using your knowledge here of the listed features and the things that we maybe have tried with him in the past to create a list of features that we might want to look at when we go to do device trials. So for Max, we'll look at a variety of different symbol options. We're finding systems that have phrases as well as single words, core words. We want that synthesized or computer generated voice for him, so it provides that nice consistency and feedback. And with his fine motor skills, we're really considering adding on a key guard or a touch guide that's kind of like a plastic grid that goes on the top of the device that might help him be more successful with those fine motor skills. And we're not looking at alternative access methods such as mouse scanning or head tracking or eye gaze, so we can kind of skip over that section there. We're not looking at integrated options for him. Those were like the environmental controls I mentioned earlier, but certainly portability and durability for Max is huge. He is a busy guy. He is in lots of different places doing lots of different activities. So we're looking at a standard size iPad tablet, and we're also considering kind of an 8 to 10 inch screen size for him. We might want to look at that 8-inch screen size to see if it might be easier for him to transfer. But because of his motor difficulties, we might be looking up to that 10-inch as well. Other things we're considering would definitely be tech support for the family as well as the team. We certainly want to know what kind of training opportunities would exist for the family and the team as well as the warranty. And there's a few additional notes that we've just jotted down here to kind of think through for Max. So based on what we've learned about Max through the SET framework, you can certainly take a minute or two to jot down the summary in your notes handout if you'd like to. So for his message creation type, we've listed that as single core words as well as a couple pre-programmed phrases because he was looking at that emergency information to be readily available. We're looking at all different types of symbols that might include MinSpeak symbols, Unity symbols, PCS, symbol sticks, or real photographs. We're looking for the voice on the device to be computer generated or synthesized. For his access method, we've ruled out alternative access. We know he's a direct selector, but he might need a key guard to support that fine motor. He might also benefit from tweaking some of the settings in the touch menu to change the dwell time or how long he would have to hold his hand on a button to kind of prevent some mishits there. Screen size, we've identified an 8 to 10 inch screen would be most portable for him. And we certainly are looking for a durable system because of his gait and his fine motor skills. Also identifying that we would need a handle and a strap for the device so that he is able to carry it by himself. And along with his gait and fine motor skills, we need to prepare for the worst case scenario and really look at what happens if something gets damaged on the device, who's there to support us, who's there to train us. So tomorrow, if you're joining us for the last workshop in the series here, we're really going to be talking more about a funnel approach too. But as you can see here, we really just simplified what technology could work for Max based on the features that he needs. And that helped us rule out kind of a whole slew of different devices or options that don't meet these needs because they don't have the features that we've just listed here. So devices that might be bigger than 10 inches or devices that don't have key guards, those might be things that we have ruled out here. Okay, so your key takeaway that you can jot down into your notes section here is that what do you want the individual to be able to communicate and where do you need them to communicate? So you can certainly take a minute or two to jot down this key takeaway. Also, take the time to take a deep breath as we have 2 more tools that Heather's going to guide you through.
Lots of fun coming up. And again, if you have questions as we're going along, and thank you, Tammy, for letting us know that the website for Dr. Joy Zabala has changed after she passed away. So we will update that in our links. So thank you for that notice and for those that weren't aware. And then Jasmine, what time is the training tomorrow? It's going to be at the same time at 3 Central, 4 Eastern, and it's an hour and a half. All right, here we go. So tool number 3 that you can use is called the Pragmatic Profile for AAC users. This is a free tool that you can use for looking at communicative intents. It's called the Pragmatics Profile for people who use AAC. It's a downloadable PDF that you can print or use interactively on your computer as a PDF. And we have a link on our AAC Language Lab website under the resources for evaluations. You can go there and you can get this PDF and download it. So you'll see that we put the little link that it's a web resource. It is over 40 pages, hence why we didn't put it in your tools handout. That would be a lot to print right now. But just know that going there, you can grab it and download it and print it as needed. Even though it's a large tool, it can provide a variety of things to consider when we're evaluating our student or our child's communication skills. It is designed to be used as an interview tool. And so taking it and interviewing family or interviewing staff, whomever, again, similar to the set, whoever's working with this client or this student, get all of that information, and we want to know how they're interacting in those different environments. You're going to ask questions of all those partners and use that to gauge the AAC user's typical communication skills for a variety of reasons. There are 4 main areas of the Pragmatics Profile that we can look at: establishing context and motivation, reasons to communicate, contextual variation, and then participation in conversation. You can look at all 4 areas of these when you're doing the evaluation, or you don't need to complete it as a whole, and you don't have to complete it from front to back. You can pick out, once you've downloaded it and you've looked through, pick out if you already know specific things about them. Maybe you don't have to spend as much time on those areas, and maybe steer towards some areas that you want more information. So kind of nice to be able to pick and choose what works, what you need. And maybe when you first start out using it, you are using it as a whole and getting some information and seeing what you gather from it. As I mentioned, it's recommended to do as an interview with communication partners, and I'm one who I would rather sit down and do that back and forth interview versus just sending something home to be completed or handing out to teachers to be completed. If you can do it as a team, even better, so that we can play off of each other's responses or go, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And so including family, including those caregivers, including teachers, gen ed and special ed. Do we have the SLP's information? Do we have the OT's information? How about PT? Are they at daycare? Are they in a church nursery or in church youth groups? Are they working with other therapists, paraprofessionals? The list goes on and on. The more people we have involved, I think the clearer picture you get of this individual. There are questions and then possible responses. So you can see here, part A, 1.1, it starts with that establishing context and motivation. So, what do they like to do? And there's a spot for you to actually write in, responses. What do they like to do? Because I often, and Megan can probably say this too, that we get a lot of, we don't know, they don't want to do anything, nothing's enjoyable, they don't want to do any of these activities. But there's things that we know they like. But I love the second part of that is how do they show you that they enjoy this? And then they give you possible answers. So again, if we're all going, I don't know, okay, do they use a facial expression or a body movement? I've had individuals where they just get this big smile and they tense up. And that's their response, that I like this. Are they vocalizing? Do they kind of make that noise? And that's their way of showing you that they like it. So just kind of going through and giving some practical examples of each of these things that we've noticed, we've observed. Part B, again, just as an example, reasons to communicate and the reactions to communication. So how do they gain attention? If you sit down and they give you this like little scenario, if you sat down close to them and look towards them, how do they generally respond? And so SLPs can probably relate to doing the PLS and saying their name and how do they respond, those kinds of things. And again, possible answers. How if you want to get their attention, how do you do it? Understanding gestures, if you point at something that you want to look at, do they look to it? How do they let you know that they have something to say or they have something to tell you? With all those prompting questions, I think it really does help you gather more information about them and get more details. Again, as you've done an interview, sometimes one person understands the question one way and can give you an answer, and then that might trigger, oh yeah, I have noticed that in class he does this, or doing OT, I've noticed this. It also then goes into how do they show dislike? So how do we know that they really don't like this? We need to know both of those as we are trying to work on communication. If any of the sections don't apply or you feel like you've gotten enough information from one section, then you can skip over it and just go on to some of the other questions. When you've gone through and you've completed that interview, there is a summary sheet within that packet, that PDF, that you can use and put your responses. So again, this is a great way to track progress, to get maybe some of those broader patterns that you start to see. What I like about this is that it's got a spot that says, does this, may do this, doesn't do this. I always like to put yet, doesn't do this yet. Not applicable. So again, if we didn't look at it, we can mark that off so we're not tracking it. And then some of those potential targets, we can mark off like, hey, this is an area that maybe we want to work on. It helps us also think about those therapy interventions. So when you're doing a trial, making it intentional, what are we going to target? What do we want our AAC tool, our AAC system to help us improve? This is what we're targeting. When you're trialing systems, you can compare if a system would help to work on those skills. Did it make improvements? If we're trialing different things, looking at multiple systems, do we see an increase in more areas with one system versus another? Because sometimes it does come down to those little nitty-gritties. Another way that they allow you to summarize the information is using this methods of communication chart. This lists out all the sections from the Pragmatic Profile, but then it asks you to rate how they communicate these things and if they're understood only by familiar communication partners or by everyone. It's a great reminder that we can accept multiple modes of communication in different settings and determine when some no-tech options might meet their needs. So for each of them, it talks about those different areas, and then are they communicating by eye contact or eye gaze? Are they using body movement? As the list goes on here, all the way up to AAC. And is it low-tech AAC, mid-tech, or high-tech? Taking inventory of how they currently communicate information to you will help with the goals for AAC, as well as targeting how to increase or improve the efficiency of how they're communicating for that reason. And one instance I can think of was recently, I was working with a team for an adult gentleman post-stroke. He, for a year, was effectively doing yes-no questions with his thumb up, thumbs down. But we know how limiting thumbs up, thumbs down, or yes-no can be. So we were trying to increase those communicative functions, those intents, also taking into consideration that limited mobility. And the team really, sat and thought things out. We were looking at their layout of their screen, and they talked about adding a yes/no button on the homepage. And so we just kind of paused, and we wanted to work through that. It was a lot more taxing, a more work for him to access the screen with a key guard to hit yes/no, versus still using his thumbs up, thumbs down. And that was more automatic for him as well. He didn't have to think through moving his arm. He could do that thumbs up, thumbs down. So we stopped and we went, okay, do we want to use the AAC system for other things and continue to increase those? Or do we need that yes, no? And ultimately they decided to take the yes, no, not put it on that home screen. So just again, thinking through, do they have something that's effective right now? and what is it? These sheets that are used to jot down those different methods of communication into a grid form, you can quickly see where things fall and how the client currently communicates their wants and needs. For example, if the client is able to communicate with a facial expression and vocalization, can we increase that with AAC for non-familiar listeners and communication partners? That would be something great we could target. Do they have a reliable way to communicate it all the time? And if it's not, then let's try to figure out what can be used. If they are using a hand slap on the table to communicate, they want more of something, and only extremely familiar communication partners understand that. That would be something we want to target in a more universal way. And so there's multiple pages to this, and again, you see a spot for AAC resource for single words or sentences, so we can start planning through that. But then looking at, are they communicating these motivation, drawing attention, etc., are on the left, and then you mark out how they currently do it, and is it for everyone or familiar listeners only. And so there's page 2 of it and page 3. Another thing that's nice about this, so kind of what you're seeing a pattern of, is a lot of our tools are allowing us to track skills and progress during the assessment, during intervention, during trials, beyond trials. So kind of a great way for multiple things. And Trisha, yes, FO, familiar listener only, or familiar only, which there's a key up in the left corner, which is kind of hard to see on the screen, but when you download it, yep, no worries. I was doing the same thing, and I'm like, oh yes. All right, so we're going to take a look at a summary of pragmatic skills for Max. Sorry about that. And we can see which skills he has been observed doing, ones that he may do sometimes, and ones that he's not doing yet. For him, on that case study handout under hopes and dreams, we could see that his parents and school staff had goals for what they would like him to be able to communicate to them, including those emergency information, his feelings. Those were key pieces they wanted to see. When we looked at the interview questions, talking about his likes and dislikes, communicating for more reasons, those came out as being areas that he's not doing yet, that you can see here with the check marks. And then especially even when we get onto that back page, we see a lot more of what he's not doing yet. We can take notes, and we can use that summary of communicative functions too. This can be the baseline. When we are completing it again after time with devices or after trials, now we've got something to measure. We can see that progress, because sometimes we know it's small progress. So maybe we move 4 of these check marks to now he's sometimes using, and that's gains. That's hard to see, similar to the ALP. It's hard to see those little gains, but they're there, and this is a great way for us to track it and document it. Based on an interview with his mom, his special education teacher, paraprofessional, and the SLP, using the Pragmatic Profile, we noted the things that he's not communicating yet throughout his day, and those are listed here on the screen. These are things we can keep in mind as we look at those language systems to see if we can start to increase these with the help of AAC. One thing that I know Megan and I often will say is, let's find where this is already programmed or already established within the system before thinking we need to recreate, reprogram, and customize because it's highly needed. Find where it is. Let's start teaching them where it is naturally, so we don't have to reinvent things. And if it's not in the system, okay, is that something we rule in or rule out? Is that going to be more work for us? Is it going to be harder for them to find? Does the system you're going to trial provide access to those types of words, those phrases, and those pages that are going to address his current needs? The next level is what he's doing inconsistently, and we would definitely want to promote more of this. We should keep these in mind as well. And so we can track if he's, starting to do those more independently. Maybe right now with that inconsistency, he needs a visual prompt or he needs a verbal prompt. But towards the end of a trial, maybe he only needs, one verbal prompt and he remembers to do some of these things with his device. Looking at, having access to those kinds of things. How can he gain attention? How can he direct actions? During the consideration process, we want to think about picking a goal or two that would be priorities that we're going to target during a trial with the devices. Again, being intentional with our trials so that we don't do this, month-long trial and go, well, it felt okay. We can use that gut feeling, but we need something more concrete to submit to funding sources. These may be deciding factors between a couple of systems after trialing. They may help you rule out certain systems if they don't provide access to those communication skills. And again, as you get more comfortable with more options that are out there, you can consider these without actually having to trial them because you can just know those features aren't available. I've tried it before. So our key takeaway from the Pragmatic Profile for AAC users would be its ability to take inventory of those current and emerging pragmatic skills and consider the availability to communicate for these reasons within an AAC system. So you can jot down that key takeaway from the Pragmatics Profile. One thing that you'll kind of notice the trend here is, again, these all sometimes, look at some similar things, but look at it from a different perspective, but still give us those layers of information. And as Megan said at the beginning, you don't have to do all of these tools with every student or every client. Starting to, in my practice, was which areas that I'm not as great at gathering information. I maybe use that tool more because I need to get more information in that area. All right, that leaves us with one more tool today, and this is called the participation model. So I am one of those that after grad school actually ordered a textbook off of Amazon because I just wanted to, study up on current trends, current research. And the book by David Bugelman and David Miranda, or Pat Miranda, sorry, read my own writing, is titled AAC, Supporting Children and Adults with Complex Communication Needs. Highly recommend it. You can even rent it off of Amazon. I don't get anything from them, but I started out just renting it thinking, okay, maybe this is just going to be some good information, but ended up buying it. It is on, I think it's on its fifth or sixth edition. Highly recommend it. It's a great reference book. It covers a lot of different aspects of AAC, talking about access and low tech and mid tech, all of the things. One thing that they cover in there is the use of this participation model for assessing AAC and helping us design interventions based on how their peers are functioning and participating in activities. And so this quote from the book, it's a systematic process for these AAC assessments, which again, I really like having something that lays it out and kind of guides me. They describe 4 phases to this model of assessment, including referral for AAC assessment, initial assessment and intervention for today, detailed assessment for tomorrow, and then a follow-up assessment. So we are only going to be looking at the first 3 phases as it pertains to the consideration process and us doing this assessment. But just know, after you've gotten a device, there's still that follow-up. We know that they usually need replacement devices, and so that's where this kind of dynamic approach, what's still working? Have we transitioned? What might they need now? What might they need next? Maybe they didn't need it before. So that would be where the 4th part of the phases comes in. With the first phase, we consider that part the referral phase. This is where someone recognizes the need for AAC and starts to form that team talking to the family, talking to the teachers, all those therapists, the AT specialists in the district, whomever is going to provide input into the student's skills and abilities to use AAC. During this phase, there should also be discussion about the funding sources available. I know it feels yucky and not always the most fun, but do they have Medicaid? Do they have private insurance? Do they have a combination of both? What do those insurance policies cover? Are there grants or local charities that can help? And we know it's uncomfortable, but having that discussion ahead of time is important because sometimes there are specific requirements for trial and purchase of a system with those systems. And so knowing that ahead of time, then you're able to, start right away with those specific things. We know as consultants, there are some insurance companies that require a set amount of time of trial. Some require prior authorization. Some, need you to have hands on multiple things. Know those ahead of time during the consideration process and find out so that we don't get, the heartache and heartbreak at the end of a trial if it's, not covered, or the family might be required to help with some of it. The next phase is where you assess their communication needs for today. You're going to gather this information from school evaluations or clinic evaluations, things you've already completed. Again, if you're in one environment versus the other, gathering the reports from other environments so that you're not reinventing the wheel, that you've got this clear picture of different spots for different evaluations. You can be using observations in classroom and in therapy, your data collection, your checklists, using this information to help guide your decisions of what to trial. This does not have to be new. You don't have to start something new like, oh, we made this referral, now I need to do this fully assessment or evaluation. It doesn't have to be specific to AAC only. We can take those 3-year reevaluations that schools do, or those quarterly private practice type evaluations that for plan of care. We can take any of those pieces and put it together. Often you'll have a lot of information that you need in those reports, and so you just have to reread them and pull out what is needed. This is also where we want to start talking about the previous tools that have been discussed, what has been tried before, and gather that into one spot. During phase 3, you want to be thinking about how robust the communication system is and if it's going to continue to support their communication in the future. Most funding sources that we know of will only provide funding for a dedicated device every 5 years. So we need to think about any environmental transitions, social transitions that might be happening in those 5 years. So if I'm in 4th grade, in 5 years I'm going to be in middle school, how is that going to look different? How is that going to be the same? Is my system going to progress with me? Same with if I'm an 18-year-old and aging out of school services in 5 years. Is it going to meet my needs in a job setting now? Are they going to be moving schools? All of those different things need to be considered, and is that system going to meet it? And when we talk about robust communication, it does also start to factor into what kind of a layout or organization of the system is coming into play. Megan had mentioned we don't want to just limit things because of motor and access. If we can hand them a variety of words right away that they can grow with, that's what we want to aim for. Determining if the system is able to support them through all those changes is really key to be considering at this phase. If it won't support them that long and insurance isn't going to pay for a new system during that change, what are they going to do? Are we just not communicating? That's not an option. And we don't want abandonment coming in. So kind of keeping that in mind. Jennifer, I saw a question pop up. Often schools are pushing iPads, even though we as SLPs always hear that iPads are not the best option for everybody. And how would you go about addressing this? We do have some discussion about that in our 3rd session tomorrow, because we know iPads are out there and they do meet a lot of kids' needs. However, it's not for everybody. And here's where those features. And so I think taking that information from all these assessments and these feature matching to say, these are the reasons why this alone doesn't meet all their needs.
And I think a big thing that you and I talked about today, Heather, because this ironically came up this morning and we
Yeah,
were chatting about it, but was, here in Minnesota and AAC is so different in different parts of the country. So this may or may not be what you guys are finding there. But oftentimes here, when we see iPads being used in the school, it was a school-owned iPad that was placed with the child to be used during the school year, but that does not equate to an iPad that is owned by the family and belongs to the child. So we'll go more in depth tomorrow, but I think that that's a big piece we were talking through this morning is the goal is that they have their own device, one that follows them when they do leave school, right? So that's a big talking point, and we'll elaborate
yes,
more if you're sitting in with us tomorrow.
yes. Thank you. That's a great question, and hopefully we answer it more thoroughly tomorrow. And sometimes they move. That's the biggest thing we've noticed here in Minnesota is, yeah, and then their iPad stayed in the previous environment. Um, so for us, that's looking at those environments. Where do they need to communicate? It's not just at school. What happens during summer break, spring break, all of those things. And yes, Martin, the training is still open. There are seats still available for tomorrow. All right. So then phase 4 is that follow-up assessment that we talked about that we're not going to, dive into too much today, but it's that ongoing dynamic assessment. We're always, tweaking things to grow. All right. Maybe we had hidden some stuff and now we're going to, we know, they need access to more. And so those periodic check-ins on the equipment, assessing new communication partners, training needs, their needs, all of that. Has access changed? You name it, we want to keep looking at it and making changes if needed. We're going to take a closer look at phase 2 because that's really where the consideration process falls. You've gotten to this point. You've gone through the myths. You've decided, yes, we're a good candidate for AAC. We've decided to assemble this team. Now what? With the participation model, we want to look at typical daily activities that the student's a part of. So it doesn't have to be something new. I always like to think of it as, okay, we're inserting this new intervention, this tool, this, AAC system. Let's not also add in brand new activity, brand new game, new things to learn. Let's, keep our variables simple. It's a good idea to look at different environments if you can. But obviously, if whoever's doing this participation model, you're only in certain environments. We will then take inventory of the activity. We want to look at who they may communicate with during your activity. You also want to look at the steps that are needed to complete the activity. So we know, it's not just a one and done. Usually there's multiple steps related to an activity. And then find a setting where they're with peers. It would be really important. And for this to really look at what is needed, what does that child who needs AAC needing in communication comparing to their peers around them? How are they participating? How are they completing the activity? How are they communicating during the activity? And so what I did is made a grid based off of this idea from Buchleman and Miranda. They had a chart in their book, and I just kind of made it more user-friendly for myself, and so I thought I would share. You'll find that this in your toolbox, in that tools handout, and we're going to start out by jotting down the steps that are needed to participate in the activity. So actually first, you pick the activity. Now we're going to jot down on the left-hand side here what those steps are for the activity. So say we're doing a cooking activity. We have to look at the recipe. We have to gather ingredients. We have to follow the steps to add those ingredients and mix it, and then, put it into a baking pan, whatever it is. So we break it down into those individual steps. Then we're going to start out with observing a peer doing this activity if we can. How does that peer typically participate and communicate for that activity? So again, if we're doing a food activity, if we're doing a science activity, if we're doing a puzzle, whatever it is, what is the typical communication associated with that activity? What steps are they following to complete the task? And, just thinking about successful completion, finishing the task. And we want to rate how independent they are in their participation and how independent they are in their communication during that activity. We then follow this with an observation of the student with a complex communication needs, or AAC possible user. How are they currently participating? And how are they currently communicating in that same activity? What parts are they successful with? And what parts did they have trouble with? And we're going to use that same rating scale to rate their independence with doing the tasks and communicating in those different tasks. So again, getting this baseline information without a system, what are we missing? What is this child, this young adult, whatever, whoever they are, what do they need to be successful to communicate in this and participate in this activity? When you're using rating or rating their participation of the peer and the student with complex communication needs, we want to look at their levels of independence. What supports do they need to complete the task? How much support from a communication partner is needed? These are just possible descriptions of independence that Buchelman and Miranda had in their book. If you already have a rating scale that you use for independence and prompting, by all means, great, use it. Don't, have to reinvent. The key is to use that same scale for the peer and your complex communicator. And so, do they require physical assistance? Do they need some hand over hand or physical guidance to complete an activity? Guiding them to the activity. Do they need verbal assistance where they're getting verbal prompts for the instruction? Are they independent with setup, meaning that we get it set up and they can go and then they're fine? Or are they completely independent? So looking back at that participation inventory grid, you see the next section is that list level of independence for the various steps. So we would go through, and at the bottom is the key to mark off, is it peer that you're rating or the complex communicator? And then also a key for level of independence. And you could, create your own abbreviations for that as well, but just kind of as a reference and reminder. Next, you want to look at the barriers to participating in the task. These barriers can be related to opportunity or access. So opportunity barriers are things like policies in place in your state, your district, your building that impact the complex communicator's ability to participate in tasks. For instance, if they are in a separate classroom all day and are not able to be with some of their peers, we can't compare them, so that would just be a barrier. Opportunity barriers related to practice are procedures or ways of doing things that have become common. So if you've often heard, yeah, well, that's how we've always done it. Those kind of barriers. Again, not judging, but just knowing that they're out there. So one barrier might be having AAC only available at school, like Megan mentioned, or SLPs who have said, I don't work on AAC for, X reasons. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't have experience, whatever it is, it happens. And we're not necessarily going to be able to change these things, but we need to be aware of them when we're considering AAC for our students and our clients, so that isn't the reason that it's deemed unsuccessful. Yes, Mindy, good point. Sometimes parents say you can use it at school, but I understand what they want and I don't need it at home. And then just kind of reframing things for them as well. That if we're looking at those hopes and dreams, what aren't they communicating at home? And I just had this conversation actually last week with a family because they're like, oh, just work on it at school and in therapy at the clinic. And that's fine because we know what she wants. And then we talked about, well, how about commenting on things, or telling jokes at home? And dad just kind of lit up like, oh yeah, we could do that. That makes sense. Or, if she's only pointing to, I want more food, let's start modeling different ways, making it more independent. So yes, great point, Mindy. Another opportunity barrier is related to the lack of knowledge around AAC for those that are going to be interacting with our complex communicators. This could be addressed during the trial by working as a team to discuss providing those opportunities throughout the day for them to interact and participate with AAC during these activities and these tasks. So again, we've, on that set framework, talked about the different things we want to target, the different tasks we want them to communicate. Let's go through these opportunity barriers. We also need to look at the barriers with skills for our communication partners. Even when we provide the information, there may still be people that struggle with how to implement it in the student's day, their comfort level with it. Knowing this during the consideration process can help us formulate those trainings. And as Megan had mentioned, when we're looking at that set framework, do staff need more information and more training? Is that part of the trial program? Is that part of the purchase of a device? You know, is there a set amount of training or is it included? Christina, I have a parent or team who wants to abandon the device now that the child's voicing words, but I want to keep going, knowing that he or she may still need it for infrequent communication breakdowns. Totally right. And I think, again, maybe revisiting these tools, kind of that dynamic assessment portion of, okay, they're talking more for this. Can we expand on that? Can we make their sentences longer? Can they have more details? What instances might we not be around that they're going to still need it in? And so go back to that set framework, go back to this participation model and start to piece out, or maybe the pragmatic profile. The last opportunity barrier is attitude. And remembering our myths and our beliefs that we talked about in part one, there are so many more attitudes and beliefs that communication partners might have that can impact the success of AAC for our students. Again, knowing these exist and working to make sure that all participants have a better understanding of how to use AAC with the student can help reduce this. We might not, fully change it. And we might not be able to change their attitude or their beliefs, but we can be aware of them and we can try to set them up for success. We can try to get them more information. We can coach them. We can model with them, brainstorm with them so that they feel part of the process. Helping them better understand the AAC system and where things are at, giving them time to explore with it. And we should also keep in mind when we look at trial data, how that might show up in our results. Because oftentimes those attitudes and beliefs may turn into limited opportunities to use the device and practice with it during our trial period or during our interventions. So on our participation inventory grid, we would jot down then what opportunity barriers that we identified during each step of the task. So, was it lack of knowledge of the AAC system during a trial, or lack of knowledge of what the language skills are for this particular student, those kinds of things. Again, if they're not in a classroom with peers to rate them with, that would be a barrier, and let's jot it down. And then we mentioned the other option of barriers is access barriers. These are definitely things that we can address during a trial and beyond. These barriers may be around the student's mobility. So when we looked at that ELP for AAC, do we have fine and gross motor concerns, access concerns? Did they have weaknesses? We talked about our kiddo Max and some of his weaknesses. Are there cognitive or decision-making deficits that would impact AAC use? And again, not using this as a prerequisite, but just knowing, is this part of their access? Is it a barrier to their access? Do they have sensory concerns or perceptual impairments? Are there any literacy deficits? Using our tools like the ELP for AAC, the SET framework, we looked a little closer at those access needs to help guide us with our decision making. The access skills and the needs also need to be taken into consideration for their participation. So again, if we know that we've got fine and gross motor and say we're doing a science experiment or I have to pour things, how does that impact? Do I have communication around that to ask for help or to say I'll watch, those kinds of things. So then these access barriers are added to our participation inventory grid, along with any notes about the complex communicator or the peer's participation in those steps. The information that's gathered here can be used to compare how the client is able to participate in that same activity before using AAC and after AAC. It's a great way to rate the effectiveness of those different devices and language software options that you're trying out. And there'll probably not be a device or system that completely addresses all of the areas or improves in participation in all areas. You know, we're realistic, but there may be one or two that are more helpful than others. And again, because we are setting a target for like, what do we want to see our child be able to do with AAC? Did we achieve that with a specific system? Awesome. And Trisha will talk at the end about your question. I love it. So let's look at the participation inventory for Max. And this was during a science lesson in the classroom. The teacher was demonstrating how food coloring changes or dilutes when we drop it in water. The students were encouraged to comment on what they saw and also to make predictions about what they thought might happen next. So we've all been in the science classroom, right? We remember being in one back in the day. Max's peer needed some assistance throughout this lesson to participate. Max required a higher level of support to participate, as you can see on here. He had more verbal prompts, more physical prompts, those kinds of things. The teacher and paraprofessionals' knowledge of Max's cognitive and language skills might have been a barrier to his participation, as noted in here. Under the notes section for Max, he needed those prompts to make comments. Teacher's explanation, maybe not fully understanding what prediction is, so that might have impacted his participation. And so that's, you know, a developing skill for him. And if they didn't know that, then we can kind of take that into consideration. His cognitive and language skills might have been a barrier to his participation, as he's still not as proficient at commenting and those abstract predictions. And I do see some great questions coming up. And we will finish this section and I will come back for questions because they look great. So if we're going to summarize what we observed for Max, he needs a robust language system to have access to words like colors for this activity, more or less, change, different, I think, so I can make that prediction. But, you know, starting slow with, oh, I think this. Being able to participate in those science lessons, having those words available. If I just had, you know, a small array of words like more, stop, or maybe I just had the colors available. And that was it. You know, maybe I just have the activity-based words. Was that enough for him? His team needs to have training on where to find those words in a system and how to encourage his use of vocabulary during the activity with that system. But this is good information for us. So we'd want to jot down in our summary of Max's participation in lesson and access to language. And so our key takeaway from the participation model, look for ways to have a child communicate during current daily activities. Again, don't worry about anything new, like what's something they already are participating in and what will aid in their participation and their communication. I'll give you a second for that. And then we'll come back to these great questions in the chat window. We know we've covered a lot of information today in 2 hours, but we hope that exploring and digging a little deeper into some of these possible tools helps you think about what could be part of your assessment practice, your consideration process, and support you in leading your teams, your families, your students to the right AAC tools to help, you know, them communicate more. Let's review the tools that we've covered today. So we looked at the ALP for AAC, and these are just, again, the summary of those key takeaways from earlier, all on one slide. So if you missed anything earlier, here they are again. And by gathering this information, we now have a better idea of what resources might be available to us to gauge our students' abilities currently and what we might want to tackle and target during a trial of AAC. And then what's next? Where do we go from here? From here, we're going to go and look at the information that we've gathered from all these tools and start to match the features to AAC systems that are out there. We want to help reach our students' communication goals now and in the future and use their strengths by adding a tool. We want to match their abilities, their tasks, their environments, that baseline information, all of it into the funnel, like Megan said, and use it to match them up with a device or an app. Not only that it's going to meet their needs for this year, but keeping in mind that it's got to go with them. So that's where part 3 of our training is going to come in tomorrow. We're going to be matching systems to needs. And so we hope you can join us for that and continue to talk about Max and his needs and guiding our exploration of device options. And we're going to just show you some examples of PRC solutions and Saltillo solutions that might possibly meet those needs so that you have an idea of at least 2 options and then take that to look at those other options. All right, so I'm going to scroll back up, and Megan, you can help me if I missed any. I saw a question from Maureen. It seems that if a child moves or when they are over 21, district-owned devices and or iPads will then be returned to the school. As a school employee, is it possible to recommend that a school-based AAC evaluation be submitted to the family's insurance? And that can be part of the process and just kind of working through as a team. We do that a lot here in Minnesota, that school teams will do the funding evaluation and help to submit it. But again, looking at the insurance policies and coverage first before you get all the way to the end and then find out that it might not be fully covered. Maybe the family has a copay or a deductible they have to meet and would have to cover the remainder of a purchased device. Tarisha, I work with very complex students with a variety of disabilities, so trying to lock down an assessment protocol for our agency. I know it might need to be student specific, but we're trying to systemize AT evals, both internal and external, and I think that's awesome, Trisha. And again, finding a couple tools that maybe you can use across multiple students, clients, I think is helpful, but they might not need all of the same pieces. But coming up with a process, which is kind of where Megan and I started with this. And Angela just brought up Autism Society of America often can help parents too. Local charities, I know we have Lions Club and Knights of Columbus, that sort of thing here in Minnesota. Those are places that we often go to. And then lots of thank yous. Thank you guys. You guys have been amazing the last 2 days.
Absolutely. We told you guys to hang on and buckle up for this one because it's a lot of information. But like you had said, I think, Heather, it's like the layers of an onion. Like each one of these tools kind of addresses a slightly different need. So it's fun to go through them with you.
Awesome. And yes, for those that are not able to attend tomorrow or can't attend everything or are going to be watching the recorded sessions, just know that when it's posted as our recording up on our websites, the handouts are available there. The key thing is that we just don't have access to the ASHA CEUs or certificates when they're attended over there. You know, it's still on demand. Come grab the information and the resources and the handouts, share away. And reach out to your regional consultants if you have more questions, and reach out to us if you have other questions as well.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for sitting in with us.
We really appreciate it. We hope to interact with you tomorrow for one more 90-minute session. Thanks, everyone.